Welcome back, everybody. These are the best horror films of the year 1990. We're now going to cover the decade of the 90s. We're going to start off with 1990 all the way through 1999. Again, the 80s have come and gone, but the 90s were almost equally as good, and some will say if not better. The horror films of 1990 take you on another realm. We're going to dive into all the best horror films, every single horror film that was released in every single year. Now let's get started with the best horror films. These are all the horror films of 1990. Now if I leave a title off here or there, don't come for me and say, oh, you forgot this. Oh, you forgot. No. These are the best films. These are the best horror films of 1990, all right? Thanks everybody for joining me. We're now going to cover the best horror films of the 90s. Let's start with 1990. An nymphoid barbarian and dinosaur hell. In a post-Armageddon world, a young woman finds herself in a fight for survival against mutant cavemen, dinosaurs, and other prehistoric monsters. Arachnophobia. A new species of South American killer spiders hitches a lift to California town in a coffin and starts to breed and kill people. Arachnophobia was a good movie. And if you hate spiders, you'll love this movie. Baby blood. When a strange creature crawls into a woman's uterus, she becomes a killer in order to feed the tiny terror growing within her. Baby blood. Body horror and horror. This movie is creepy, but it's good. Basket Case 2. Dwayne and his basket-bound mutant brother are taken in by a secret home for wayward freaks, with journalists hot on their trail. Basket Case 2 will not disappoint. Begotten. Body horror. Fantasy horror. Presented in a surreal, gory, and entirely visual manner, Begotten tells the death of religion, the abuse of nature by man, and a nihilistic outlook. Begotten. Beyond Darkness. A minister and his wife move into a haunted house. Beyond Darkness. Now, it doesn't look like the old man from Phantasm. That movie poster looks like Phantasm to me. Blood Clan. In the past, a family is executed by soldiers for cannibalism, except for the little girl, Katie. She is adopted by Judge McKay and goes home with him to Canada and starts killing people. Blood Clan. Blood Salvage. Twisted tale about a crazy preaching redneck named Jake who kidnaps people off the highway and performs sick medical experiments on them. Blood Salvage. Comedy and horror. Blood Moon. A serial killer is loose at an all-girls school where he strangles girls with a piece of barbed wire. Ugh. Slasher horror. The first slasher horror of 1990. Blood Moon. Brain Dead. In a showdown of man versus machine, Martin plunges into a chaotic nightmare, trying to save his mind from the megalomaniacal corporation. Brain Dead. Dark comedy, horror, and thriller. Bride of Reanimator. Doctors Herbert West and Dan Kane discover the secret to creating human life and proceed to create a perfect woman from dead tissue. Bride of Reanimator. Buried Alive. A husband finds out that his wife and her lover are trying to kill him. And now you're trying to kill me. Crime, drama, fantasy, and horror. Buried Alive. A Cat in the Brain. Slasher horror. A horror film director is stalked by a mad psychiatrist serial killer bent on killing people to model the killings after the director's gory death scenes from his movies. A Cat in the Brain. Child in the Night. A psychologist treats an 8-year-old boy who witnessed his father's murder, but the child blocks out details that can help out the police. Child in the Night. Drama, mystery, horror, and thriller. Child's Play 2. Slasher horror. While Andy's mother is admitted to a psychiatric hospital, the young boy is placed in foster care, and Chucky, determined to claim Andy's soul, is not far behind. Killer Crocodile 2. The Caribbean swamps, which is to be made into a holiday resort, is terrorized again by a second monstrous crocodile, which is killing off anyone unfortunate to be on the water. Crocodile 2 is fun. Crystal Force. At John's funeral, a seemingly kind old man stands near John's widow, Hope. He is the master of the crystal, possessor of its light and terror. Crystal Force. Cursed. When a gargoyle falls off a church during a storm, a scientist and his assistant take him back to their lab, where they are doing genetic experiments. Cursed. Horror. This movie is creepy and good. You'll love it. Daughter of Darkness. The enigma facing young Catherine is the identity of her father. Unfortunately for her, she is drawn into a small sub-hallucinogenic Romanian underworld of brooding menace and terror. Dead End Girls. A female band who are exponents of death rock retreat to a cabin for the weekend. They soon find themselves being knocked off by a masked killer. Slasher horror and thriller. Dead Girls. Deadly Manor. Slasher horror. A group of young people take refuge in an old deserted mansion. Soon the members of the group start turning up dead, and they realize that they're not alone in the mansion. Deadly Manor. Dead Men Don't Die. Comedy, crime, and horror. A reporter investigating a drug dealing ring is murdered. Brought back to life by the voodoo spell of a cleaning woman, he goes after his killers. Dead Men Don't Die. Death by Love. Sculptor Joel Frank finds himself being stalked by a devil-worshipping childhood friend who Frank suspects is murdering his every new girlfriend. Death by Love. Horror. Here we have Deep Blood, like a Jaws ripoff. Several young men have to stop an ancient Native American evil in the form of a killer shark, which is attacking a small beach community. So if you like Jaws and sharks, you'll love Deep Blood. Death by Temptation. An evil succumbs is preying on libidinous black men in New York City, and all that stands in her way is a minister in training. Horror. Death by Temptation. Demon Cop. A former probationary officer who is a patient at a mental asylum escapes and prowls the city. Werewolf horror. Demon Cop. Crime and horror. Demon Wind. With the need to investigate the mysterious death of his grandparents, Corey and his friends assemble back to the old farm where it all began 6 years earlier. Demon Wind. Demonia. A Canadian archaeological team in Sicily accidentally unleashes vengeful ghosts of 5 demonic nuns who were murdered 500 years earlier. Horror, mystery, and slasher. Demonia. Disturbed. 10 years ago, the perverse Dr. Russell couldn't resist the beauty of a young patient in his mental clinic and raped her one night. Now she's out for revenge. Disturbed. Empire of the Dark. A private detective searching for a killer comes across a satanic cult from another dimension, monsters called up from hell, and murderous ninja assassins. Empire of the Dark. The Rift. Siren 2, a submarine under the command of Captain Phillips, ventures into the deep on a mission to recover the missing Siren 1. Action, adventure, horror and mystery, and monsters. Evil Spirits. A strange woman runs a boarding house whose tenants mostly misfits and others who won't be missed. Evil Spirits and horror. Horror. Evil Spirits. Fatal Exam. Slasher horror. A group of university students are invited by their parapsychology professor to investigate a haunted house for the weekend. Slasher horror, supernatural horror, and thriller. fertilize the blaspheming bombshell. Sheila Khan is menaced by Satan worshippers on her journey from Brooklyn to Las Vegas. Horror, featuring Bo Hopkins and Rick Hill. Lisa, a flirtatious teenager with an eye for older men, gets more than she bargained for when the handsome stranger she's pursuing turns out to be a serial killer. Lisa better watch out. Drama, horror, and thriller. The Final Sacrifice. Fleeing from the cult that murdered his father, a teen is aided in his quest to find the lost city of the fabled Zox by a secretive drifter. The Final Sacrifice. Adventure, fantasy, and horror. The First Power. A dedicated LA police detective and a psychic must stop a demonic serial killer who was given the powers of resurrection, teleportation, and possession. The First Power. This movie is good. Flatliners, a really good movie. 5 medical students experiment with near-death experiences until the dark consequences of past tragedies begin to jeopardize their current lives. Psychological horror. Flatliners. Frankenhooker or Frankenslut. A medical student sets out to recreate his decapitated fiancée by building her a new body made of Manhattan Street prostitutes, hookers, and sluts. Frankenstein Unbound. The ultimate weapon, which was meant to be safe for mankind, produces global side effects including time slides and disappearances. Drama, horror, and sci-fi. Frankenstein Unbound. Ghoul School. Sex, babes, and rock and roll. 2 thugs in search of hidden treasure mistakenly unleash a chemical into the school's water supply, causing everyone that comes in contact with it to become flesh-eating ghouls. Graveyard Shift. In a very old textile mill with a serious rat infestation, deadly accidents start happening. Graveyard Shift. This movie is creepy with a lot of good jump scares. You'll love it. Gremlins 2, The New Batch. The Gremlins are back, and this time they've taken control of a New York City media mogul's high-tech skyscraper. Satire, slapstick, comedy, and horror. Gremlins 2, The New Batch, featuring Zach Galligan. Grim Prairie Trails. Grim Prairie Trails is a 1990 horror anthology movie where a cynical bounty hunter and clerk traveling through the prairies rest by the campfire telling ghost stories. The Guardian. Supernatural horror. Young married couple Philippe and Kate, who have a newborn son named Jake, don't realize that their new nanny Camilla is a magical druid. The Guardian. Hard to Die. While doing the inventory for a lingerie outlet in a high-rise office building, 5 attractive women are terrorized by a series of bizarre killings. Slasher horror, Hard to Die. This movie is good, campy, fun, and gory. Hardware. The head of a cyborg reactivates, rebuilds itself, and goes on a violent rampage in a Space Marine's girlfriend's apartment. Hardware. Cyberpunk, dark comedy, horror, and sci-fi. Haunting Fear. A woman has nightmares of being buried alive, which somehow awakens a long-repressed entity inside her, while her greedy, cheating husband plots to murder her for her money. Hiroku the Goblin. A goblin is sent to Earth to behead students and turn their bodies into demons. Comedy, fantasy, and horror. So a goblin comes to Earth and starts beheading people. That's pretty gory and graphic. Check it out. I Bought a Vampire a Motorcycle. When a motorbike gang kills an occultist, the evil spirit he was summoning inhabits the damaged bike. That bike, the bike is then brought and restored, but reveals its true nature when it tries to exact vengeance on the gang. I'm Dangerous Tonight. When Amy turns an ancient Aztec priest's cloak into a dress, she discovers it's cursed, and whoever wears it comes under its evil influence. In the Cold of the Night. Scott is a fashion photographer concerned about the sudden appearance of nightmares in his nightly dreams. Erotic thriller, drama, mystery, and horror. in the cold of the night. It. In 1967, preteens outcasts fight an evil demon who possesses a child-killing clown. It. This was a TV miniseries featuring Richard Thomas, Tim Reed, Annette O'Toole, Christopher. Jacob's Ladder. Mourning his dead child, a haughty Vietnam War veteran attempts to uncover his past while suffering from a severe case of disassociation. Jacob's Ladder. Tim Robbins and Danny Aiello. Chameleons. Nathaniel Pickman Wingate has opened a gateway to another dimension using equations and equipment in his basement laboratory. Chameleons. Killer tornadoes strike back. Professor Gangrene attempts to brainwash the world. A police assistant and a tomatologist team up to stop him. So they need a tomatologist to stop the killer tomatoes. Living Doll. Howard, a shy morgue worker, falls in love with a girl who ends up in the morgue, but she doesn't let that stop him. Living Doll. Drama, fantasy, and horror. Look Who's Toxic. Look Who's Toxic. A millionaire's irresponsible decision to dump millions of gallons of toxic waste into public waters comes back to haunt him. Look Who's Toxic. Horror. The Lost Platoon. An American reporter covering a civil war in Nicaragua discovers that 4 soldiers that he used to know during World War II are there and are now actual vampires. Luther the Greek. A psychotic killer convicted of multiple murder is released on parole after spending 20 years in prison. Dark comedy slasher horror. Luther the Geek. Magic Cop. A former cop rejoins the police department to investigate a drug ring that employs ghosts and vampires. Magic Cop. Comedy, crime, fantasy, and horror. Maniac Cop 2. A supernatural maniac killer cop teams up with a Times Square serial killer. Maniac Cop is gory, slasher, and a lot of fun to watch. If you love movies of the 90s, you'll love this one. Meridian. 2 American girls in Italy are drugged and raped by an evil magician and his twin brother who suffer from a curse that turns them into beast men each day. Meridian. Metamorphosis. An anti-aging serum. An anti-aging serum is being developed by a scientist. When he loses his funding, he uses it on himself with dire results. Metamorphosis, the alien factor. A virus from outer space transforms a bio-researcher into a bloodthirsty monster. Horror, sci-fi, and thriller. Metamorphosis. That's good. Midnight Ride. A housewife just left her cop husband. When she picks up Justin McKay, she'll wish she never did, as she's plunged into a nightmare in the grip of a psychotic killer. Midnight Ride. Dark comedy and horror. Mirror Mirror. A teenage girl begins receiving black magic power through an antique mirror that drips blood, not realizing the mirror is controlled by demonic forces. Mirror Mirror. On the Wall. Mr. Frost. A serial killer gets sent to a mental institution, but as his insidious presence causes doctors and orderlies to receive strange visions, his psychiatrist tries to find out his true identity. Night Angel. An evil spirit assumes the disguise of a beautiful young woman, so it can then seduce and kill men. Night Angel. Horror. Night Killer. A surviving amnesiac victim of a serial killer is terrorized while the police works with a psychiatrist to bring him to justice and stop a new crime wave. Night Killer. Night Breed. A troubled young man is drawn to a mythical place called Median, where a variety of friendly monsters are hiding from humanity. Nightbreed will not disappoint. Monster horror, slasher horror. Nightmare on the 13th floor. A reporter investigates the disappearance of guests at a hotel which she is writing a report about. Along the way, she will find an unmarked 13th floor where a murderer is on the loose. Nightwish. A professor and 4 graduate students journey to a house in the mountains to investigate paranormal activities. But the experiment goes wrong after an alien entity starts attacking them. Gate 2, The Trespassers. 4 teens summon forth a diminutive demonic minion from outer space to do their bidding and grant wishes. Gate 2, The Trespassers. Night of the Living Dead. When the unburied dead return to life and seek human victims, 7 refugees shelter in a house in the Pennsylvania countryside. Night of the Living Dead. Pale of Blood. Pale of Blood. A vampire arrives in Los Angeles to investigate a recent series of murders which bear the hallmarks of a vampire. The Phantom of the Opera. A young soprano becomes the obsession of a horribly disfigured composer who has plans for those who oppose him or the young singer. The Phantom of the Opera. I have plans for you. Playroom. An archaeologist is haunted by a nightmare in which his family is murdered. Horror and thriller. Playroom. If you like horror and slasher and thriller, you'll love it. Spontaneous combustion. A young man finds out that his parents had been used in an atomic weapons experiment shortly before he was born. Body horror, dark comedy, and horror. Predator 2. The Predator returns to Earth, this time to stake a claim on the war-torn streets of a dystopian Los Angeles. Alien invasion and horror. Predator 2 was awesome. Prom Night 3, The Last Kiss. A malevolent spirit of Mary Lou Maloney returns to Hamilton High, where she manipulates a naive male student into helping her wreak havoc on the school. Dark comedy, supernatural horror, and thriller. Psycho 4, The Beginning. Norman Bates recalls his childhood with his abusive mother while fearing his unborn child will inherit his split personality disorder. Psycho 4, The Beginning. Red-blooded American Girl. A young woman is transformed into a vampire by a virus. The vampire doctor who's treating her hires a young scientist to find a cure. Comedy, horror, sci-fi, and thriller. The Reflecting Skin. In the 1950s, a young boy living with his troublesome family in rural USA fantasizes that a neighboring widow is actually a vampire. Drama, horror, and thriller. The Reflecting Skin. Repossessed. Parody of The Exorcist of 1973. While with Linda Blair once again possessed by Satan and Leslie Nielsen as the exorcist. Parody, slapstick, comedy, and horror. Repossessed, you'll love it. Rockula. A young vampire cannot lose his virginity because of a curse imposed upon him centuries ago. Vampire horror, comedy, horror, and musical. Rockula. This movie is awesome. Check it out. Satan's Princess. A down-on-his-luck cop runs into harder times when he is searching for a missing woman. Satan's Princess. Crime, horror, and thriller. Featuring Robert Forster. Shadow Zone. Scientists experiment with extreme deep sleep and find a parallel dimension. Now they find the door works both ways and something has come through. Shadow Zone. Horror and sci-fi. Shakma. Medical students are attacked by an aggressive laboratory animal while locked inside their campus medical building competing in an after-hours role-playing game similar to Dungeons & Dragons. Horror, sci-fi, and thriller. Sorority House Massacre 2. 5 college women buy the old Hochstetter place for their new sorority house. They decide to stay in it for the night to meet the movers in the morning, but begin to get the creeps when the weird neighbor starts poking around. Shock 'em dead. Martin is a total loser who makes a deal with the devil to become the greatest rock star in the world. Shock 'em dead. Horror, musical, and thriller. So he made a deal with the devil. Shredder Orpheus. Skateboarder named Orpheus and friends go to hell to stop television signals that are brainwashing Americans. Shredder Orpheus. Horror from 1990. Silent Night, Deadly Night. 4. Initiation. A reporter investigating the bizarre death of a woman who leaped from a building in flames finds herself mixed up in a cult of witches who are making her part of their sacrificial ceremony during the Christmas holiday. Singapore Sling. A man searching for his long-lost lover is kidnapped by her killers, an insane mother-daughter duo, and they force him to commit various sexual atrocities on them. Singapore Sling. Skinned Alive. This is the tale of a crazed family of weirdos led by Crawl Daddy who likes to kill people and remove their skin. Comedy and horror. Skinned Alive. Slumber Party Massacre 3. Jackie Cassidy and her friends are stalked by a serial killer while having a slumber party. Remember Sorority House Massacre? Here's Slumber Party Massacre 3. Slasher Horror. Sorority Girls and the Creature from Hell. A group of sorority girls go up to a cabin in the woods, accompanied by some boys. To their dismay, there is an escaped convict on the loose, as well as an uncle hell-bent on killing people. Sorority House Massacre 2. 5 college women buy the old Hochstetter place for their new sorority house. They decide to stay in it for the night to meet the movers in the morning, but begin getting the creeps when their neighbor starts killing people one by one. Soul Taker. 4 teenagers are killed in a car accident. 2 of the teenagers refuse to go with the Grim Reaper, and a race between life and death ensues. Soul Taker. Fantasy and horror. This movie is good. Spirits. A priest trying to regain his standing in the church after failing and sleeping with women teams with a group of ESP experts to investigate a haunted house. Spirits. Drama, fantasy, and horror. Spontaneous combustion. A young man finds out that his parents have been used in an atomic weapons experiment shortly before he was born, and that the results have had some unexpected effects on him. The Suckling. A pregnant woman reluctantly goes to an illegal abortion clinic, which also doubles as a brothel, only to have her aborted mutated fetus attack everyone at the clinic. Monster Horror. The Suckling. Syngenor. A scientist engineers a group of genetically engineered creatures for use as super soldiers to fight U.S. wars in the Middle East. Horror and sci-fi. Syngenor. Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. To stall a witch plotting to eat him, a boy reads her horror tales dealing with a collegian's resurrection of a mummy, a murderous cat, and an artist pact with a gargoyle. Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. Leatherface. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. A California couple and survivalists encounter Leatherface and his family. Slasher horror, and thriller. The Crawlers. People from a small town are attacked by evil radioactive tree roots growing in the forest. The Crawlers. Next up we have is the classic thriller, Los Demonios del Desierto, the Demons of the Desert. This movie talks about zombies and alien creatures killing people in the desert, starring Fernando Almada and Sergio Bustamante. The Sleeping Car. Slasher horror. Jason moves into an abandoned train car where he resurrects the vicious ghost of his landlady's dead husband. The Sleeping Car. This movie's creepy and evil. The Willies. They gave me the Willies. A harmless backyard campout becomes an unforgettable night of chills and thrills for three young boys as they share their favorite scary stories. The Willies, featuring Sean Astin. The Amityville Curse. 5 people spend the night in an abandoned house, an Amityville haunted house, and soon find themselves terrorized by assorted ghosts, venomous insects, and ghostly apparitions. The Amityville Curse. The Dark Side of the Moon. In 2022, a repair crew is sent to fix an orbital weapon, but their spaceship malfunctions and ends up heading towards the dark side of the moon. Action, drama, fantasy, and horror. The Exorcist 3. A police lieutenant uncovers more than he bargained for as he investigates a series of murders, which have all the hallmarks of a deceased Gemini serial killer. The Exorcist 3. The Green Man. An alcoholic pub landlord has visions of a 17th century doctor of the occult, beginning a monumental clash between good and evil. Comedy and horror. The Green Man. The Disturbance. A psycho is on the prowl, and his victims are all beautiful women. The police must catch him before he kills again. And now I have to kill you. That's what they say. Next up we have is The Haunting of Morella. Loosely based on the short story of Edgar Allan Poe, a witch is sent to death only to try and return from the grave, 17 years later, to possess her daughter's adult body. The Invisible Maniac. An invisible scientist escapes from an asylum and teaches high school physics to nubile teens. So we have an invisible professor going back to school to teach kids. Next up we have is The Mask of Satan. Loosely based on Black Sunday, a group of skiers get lost in the mountains and come across the snowy tomb of a centuries-old witch. The Mask of Satan, or La Máscara del Demonio. Semya Burdakolov. A newspaper sends a young reporter into the Russian countryside to make a nice sensationalist yarn out of some strange stories that go around. Tremors. Everybody loves Tremors. Natives of a small isolated town defend themselves against strange underground creatures which are killing them one by one. Tremors, it was very original, very good, and a lot of fun. Troll 2. A vacationing family discovers that the entire town they're visiting is inhabited by goblins, disguised as humans, who plan to eat them. Troll 2. Supernatural horror. The Crawlers. People from a small town are attacked by evil radioactive tree roots growing in the forest. The Crawlers. Featuring Jason Saucier and Mary Sellers. Two Evil Eyes. A duo of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations about a greedy wife's attempt to embezzle her dying husband's fortune, and a sleazy reporter's adoption of a strange black cat. Vampire Cop. Police officer Lucas only works at night. He also knows how to take a bite out of crime, literally. But when the vampire cop bites the city's reigning drug boss, he inadvertently creates a nemesis as powerful as himself. Watchers 2. A fugitive Marine finds a genetically re-engineered dog psychically linked to a dead monster created in a lab experiment gone wrong. Wheels of Terror. A small town is terrorized by an unknown stranger who kidnaps and abuses little girls. Wheels of Terror. Horror and thriller. Whispers. A woman is stalked by a psychopathic killer. She eventually kills him only for the man to show up again, this time sane and without any knowledge of the attacks. The police don't believe her, but one detective agrees to look into it. Extro 2, The Second Encounter. Military scientists discover an alternate dimension and subsequently aliens with an appetite for human flesh. Extro 2, The Second Encounter. Those were the best horror films of 1990. Those were all the horror films that came out that year in movie theaters, drive-ins, cable TV, and made-for-TV movies. What do you think about 1990, starting off the decade of the 90s? What horror movies do you remember most from 1990 in particular? Were there any movies that I may have left out from 1990 that you remember watching that I didn't cover? If so, please leave that title below, and I'll see if I can cover that in another video. Alright, we're into the 90s, the 80s are over, the 70s are over. We're now going to conquer the best horror films of the 90s. That was just the best horror films of 1990. I'll stick around, stay tuned, as I'll see you all for the best horror films of 1991. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon.